All right. We'll go ahead and get started since everyone is busy. And let's see. Good morning, everyone. Whoever just joined us. My name is Aralda Goli, and it's 10:31. We're going to get started. Just so that I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items for those who might be new to GoToWebinar, but it's just like Zoom and other video call platforms. You may open and close your control panel by clicking the red arrow on the top right-hand side, and join audio by choosing either your mic and speakers to use voice over IP, or choose telephone and dial the information provided. Please submit your questions and comments via the questions panel, and if you have any technical issues, please privately message me or Alicia Lopez, our other staff member. Please note that today's presentation is being recorded and will be provided once available, and we will post everything on our website. The PowerPoint presentation you will see, it is posted under the handouts section, which is a box underneath Q&A box that you may download it now. And also the Leaderships in Times of Crisis report published by the IEDC is also can be located there. Both of these materials will be also posted on the website as well. And with that, by the way, yes, this meeting is being recorded and there will be no audio for the audience. And with that, we go to Chairman Bailey.
Great. Good morning. And thank you, Ms. Goli, for putting everything together. I'm Chair of the South Florida Region Planning Council. We're excited to welcome you to this discussion on leadership in time of crisis, best practices and strategies. Before we get to our speakers in a few minutes, I would like to introduce the South Florida Region Planning Council. Our mission is to identify long-term challenges and opportunities facing Southeast Florida and assist the region leaders in developing and implementing creative strategies that result in more prosperous and equitable community, a healthier and cleaner environment, and a more vibrant economy. The council has served Monroe, Miami-Dade, and Broward counties since 1974 through regional collaborative planning. The council was designated the South Florida Economic Development District by the U.S. Department of Commerce in 1994. Among other services, the council offers a robust economic development program, which includes planning, technical assistance, and revolving loan fund programs for small businesses, COVID-impacted businesses, and other critical needs. If you're interested in learning more about our services and how we can help your organization, please reach out to Mr. Goli or Mr. Cassidy. Upcoming events. If you like this webinar, you may join us at future events. On November 9th, we'll have the Future of South Florida Workforce Post-COVID-19 webinar, and we'll also have more educational programs coming soon. So please visit our website for those updates. Before our first speaker goes on, I'd like to set the stage for today's program. We hope that you take away from today's program helpful insights that will help you apply some of the lessons learned from them to your very own economic development strategies. You will learn why local governments and economic development organizations should play a leadership role in both disaster preparedness and the economic recovery process. In disaster impacted communities, EDOs are in a position to lead economic recovery efforts by helping local businesses respond to impact on their employees, their facilities, their customers, and supply network. This program will help you set up a plan of action to be a resilient community to respond more effective to the economic aspects of disasters and to lead in recovery efforts. The main topic that will be covered today will be communication, economic diversification, neighborhood revitalization, and business retention. Now I would like to hand over to the program to Frankie Clarkson. It's my pleasure to introduce our first presenter. Frankie, she's the Vice President of Knowledge Management and Development Practice for the International Economic Development Council. The IEDC is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization serving economic developers. Welcome, Ms. Clarkson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bailey. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I'm looking forward to sharing, as Chairman Bailey said, some of the best practices that IEDC has identified from our work with communities around the country. We are indeed a membership organization, and we hold conferences, and we can take a look at the slides whenever you're ready, and serve that function of being a repository of information. Next slide, as I continue to describe the organization. We have about 5,000 members. We're almost 100 years old, and we include EDOs as well as chambers of commerce, utilities, educational institutions, nonprofits, and many other organizations involved in economic and community development. We're based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to help people, our members, and the larger audience through platforms such as restoreyoureconomy.org, which are free to all, to help them do their jobs more effectively. Next slide. And as I said, we do so like a membership organization through conferences and networking, certification programs, so that there are many that have more than 10 years of experience and are operating with the highest level of knowledge as recognized by IEDC. And we also accredit organizations that meet these standards. We have economic development journal, a newsletter, and then we conduct technical assistance and research. And that's kind of what I oversee, as well as the content in the newsletters. That can be on a wide range of topics, but as you might see on the bottom, we have an economic recovery program, which deals really most explicitly with the disaster recovery, which has been natural disasters, but it's also been man-made disasters. We have responded to the decline of the coal industry, for example, and to BRAC way back in the day when base realignment and closure was an issue. And then there's been a series of natural disasters. Since 2005, we've been active since Hurricane Katrina, deploying subject matter experts really that come from our membership around the country. But now we have COVID. It's a you could call it man-made. It's its own kind of disaster. Next slide. We have been around the country. What's hidden down there is that we have indeed been in the Southeast, in your neck of the woods. Unfortunately, due to the vulnerability of the area, we've been in there post-Irma and post-Maria. Next slide. And that's been, I should mention, we're not like FEMA. We are not on the ground in the, in the immediate aftermath in terms of that kind of recovery on that level. We're more involved in medium-term and long-term recovery. And I think everybody is. So that's why people talk about resilience and mitigation. And part of the reason for this forum. So EDOs, industry associations and chambers are key. They are the bridge often between the public and the private sector. They identify the resources. We're getting better and better at doing this, through websites and through communication with our community. And we help identify gaps. And those gaps may be in communities that are more kind of off the grid, that are more in the informal sector, that are not thriving as much. We need to keep equity in mind as in our recovery. And EDOs can increase our capacity and work in the area of preparedness, as well as assist government, which again may have many blind spots when it comes to the private sector. Next slide. So we want to have a lead organization, which is often going to be an EDO or a chamber, and it might be your main chamber, but again, I am going to mention there are minority organizations that have their own chambers. So we want to engage all organizations that that work with businesses. While indeed we want to have a lead centralized source. That centralized source needs to be coordinating outreach to connect with businesses. They need to keep an updated contact list and coordinate post-disaster media strategies, which we'll talk about more, which is to say managing the narrative, and then build relationships, of course, coordinating. And that's with current contacts in the public sector, in the private sector, and that means your anchor institutions as well as your small businesses. As I mentioned again, let's not just let's talk about small businesses that are already struggling, that don't have much cash flow reserves, and face higher failure rates. Let's know where they are. Let's know if it's fishermen or gig workers that don't have business licenses and tax forms and aren't ready to get capital if they need it. Let's have these relationships and know the different sectors of our community, and engage our nonprofit and our faith-based partners, which we sometimes forget about, which are so key. A nonprofit can set up funds, for example, that can provide grants during post-disaster scenarios. As I mentioned, identifying firms and industries that are at risk. We'll get to diversification in a minute. Next slide. So in terms of business communications, those are absolutely core activities. We wanted to talk about communications, and local government leaders are making emergency decisions that have a direct impact on business. And it's very important that they, for example, have an organized system when it comes to emergency management and communication plans. For example, I'm indicating here tiered reentry, which is kind of a best practice system, because in the aftermath of a disaster, what's going to happen often businesses are delayed in terms of getting back on premises, and in that time period, they lose a lot of their assets that might be perishable or that may otherwise be getting damaged and depreciating. So in the case of Jefferson Parish, which is the New Orleans Parish, for example, they have a system called Jumpstart Jefferson, and it relies on a business registry in which businesses self-register prior to any type of evacuation. And then the parish administrator assigns the businesses to 3 tiers, correlated to how important the business is to prepare the community for the return of its citizens, i.e. providing essential services like related to health or related to food supplies. So it's very important that economic developers convey these are the kinds of needs that we have, to keep our economy going, that you need to plan for. Next slide. Communicating with businesses. And we're going to talk a little bit about media management, but among businesses, rumors spread quickly and can lead to slower economic recovery. Businesses are suffering from a real lack of information or misinformation in the aftermath of a disaster. As a result, they may delay opening, or they may move. And we know that if the longer a business does not reopen following a disaster, the more likely they are to close and for us to lose them in our communities. Businesses may also be poached, and that applies perhaps to larger industries. When IEDC first got involved in disaster recovery, or kind of like when we really first got involved in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina, we issued a statement because we noticed that there was site selectors, or there was activity in terms of attempted recruitment of industries and major employers in New Orleans saying, well, why don't you relocate to where we are? And the statement from IDC was that they stood against that. Kind of I don't think that the word poaching was not in the statement, but essentially they're vulnerable to that. So businesses may attempt to communicate anyone for information, so you want to be prepared to be responsive to that information. I think we've all been through enough disasters now where people have something in place. You've been through a lot of natural disasters in Florida, but updates regarding COVID and the particular needs regarding COVID, the digital commerce and connectivity and these kinds of needs can be part of your information that you're updating, for example, when it comes to resources and strategies to your businesses. Next slide. Media and narrative. So when it came to Superstorm Sandy as one example, the media left the impression that the entire New Jersey shore was out of business, when in fact areas such as Cape May, a major tourist area, and the Wildwood Boardwalk were unaffected and open for business. So the state then waged a campaign to open for business. So that's very important. Next slide. And furthermore, what I'll say about that is that, as you know, the media is very visual. So when they see that it's the damage pictures they want to see, so you need to keep the conversation going and try. And I think the next slide will convey this, but there's going to be areas that are included, as we just saw Cape May as being part of the damage story, that really shouldn't have been in the story. But frankly, there are going to be areas that are excluded as well. Like there's a focus on population centers like New Orleans, when you have outlying parishes that may have more damage. So in developing your communication plan, you want to basically be ready and have a spokesperson and have your statements available in advance. Next slide. And I think we've talked about the misinformation that's harmful to businesses and the economy, and how we need that timely and accurate information, and we need the spokesperson. Next slide. So, you know, again, kind of summarizing this particular topic, we want to publicize milestones when we can. Every well, so-called ribbon cutting, you know, ribbon cutting that indicates a reopening, you know, we want to advertise to our local media to the extent that we can, and all those recovery successes and all of that reopening. As I said earlier, you know, we want to keep the story about the whole region too, and not leave some areas forgotten. In extreme cases, you may want to consider hiring a P4R firm, but in all cases, you want to have a designated spokesperson. Even if your city or community isn't big enough to have like a communications lead, you'll want to designate one. Next slide. This is an example of a success story. It was in Grand Junction area, Colorado. And one reason it was probably successful is the collaboration between the chamber, the health department, and the local media. It's so important to involve the health department to get, again, that accurate information, so you don't have misinformation, so that the businesses can follow the protocol on PPE. Because what that did was it provided recognition from the state of Colorado, indeed, about how the best practices in the community. So the goal was to increase consumer confidence in the local businesses, so the customers would get out there and to showcase the local businesses, and to keep the community safe. Safety had to be a goal. Next slide. And due to that program, Mesa County was one of the first counties in Colorado that was granted a variance from the state of Colorado's COVID-19 mandates because of the mitigation plan. Next slide. So we're going to talk about revitalization, resilience, and diversification. And we know how important all of this is. Now, revitalization, I suppose in the sequencing of things, this is what happens when you've been struck by a disaster, and you need to put together a revitalization plan in order for there to be a rebound in your community. And you do this with partners, and you mobilize your resources. Next slide. There's going to be a lot of information that you're going to need to compile. Data is absolutely necessary. And one thing I'll say that's not here is that metrics, data on your community in terms of the baseline is of absolute importance, because if you don't have that, then you won't be able to measure the impact. So estimates of property and equipment damage, economic activity loss, workforce disruption and loss. And again, I would say pay attention to your demographics, and that relates to financial and technical assistance needs and segments. And I'm talking industries, you know, and types of workforce, whether it's tourism or work, or you know, and the frontline workers, the gig workers. whether it's Hispanic and Black, other BIPOC businesses that are failing at higher rates, may need more technical assistance, maybe are not getting PPP loans at the same higher rate and may need to go to CDFIs, or your city or county may want to have another kind of a bridge, financing mechanism. And your state has done that well. The Florida Small Emergency Bridge Loan Program was activated in 1992 following Hurricane Andrew, and with interest-free loans of up to $50,000 that were repayable within 12 months. And since its inception, it was activated over 13 times, providing $63 million in aid to 2670 to a couple thousand businesses. And so you may have your own local version, or your revolving loan fund may help as well. There's more and more targeted grant funds as well. Next slide. Economic resilience programs. And I put first under this definition, these are programs and efforts that seek to bolster our community's ability to withstand or avoid shocks. It's sometimes hard to avoid shocks, so we won't spend as much time talking about that. I mean, we were all affected by the pandemic. It was hard to avoid that, but you can withstand and mitigate effects to some degree. There are things you can do. For example, some of the means of assistance include business continuity plans and helping your businesses in advance have those, and again, having their information in a cloud, knowing what their supply chain backup reinforcements might look like, and having all their paperwork, whether it's tax forms, business licenses, in place if they need to apply for loans. And then diversification is a very, very key to economic resilience. Next slide. So here's an example of an assistance to businesses, which took place in Toronto in 2016. And it created the Digital Main Street Initiative. And I don't think that I know there wasn't a hurricane up in Toronto, and we didn't have COVID there yet, but they created this initiative, and it was a platform to help small businesses grow their digital operations, and it helped them get access to trainings, grants, and assistance with transitions, because indeed they were going to need to make those transitions. And this program helped them open online storefronts essentially during COVID, because they had the information infrastructure in place starting with this program in 2016. Next slide. So when the hospitality, film, and tourism television industries, which are core to Toronto, took a hit, they really expanded and doubled down on this platform. And since the expansion of the platform, approximately 30,000 more businesses have digitized operations, helping them stay afloat. Next slide. So this is just a paradigm on economic diversification and how you approach it. And the first thing you want to do is to study it. So, this is to know what your industries are, and what are growing and declining, and to support positive trends and minimize risks. Creating an ecosystem of support for entrepreneurs is very important. Small businesses employ more people than large industries, and we want to keep them vibrant, and it increases the chance that new companies will emerge. Maximizing available assets through working regionally and otherwise, and developing and promoting target industries. And again, you do this under blue skies, and it's not a disaster response strategy. Next slide, or it shouldn't be. Here are just a few examples. Here is in Georgia, Early County, a timber farm was transformed into a solar farm in the wake of the realization that the timber industry was vulnerable. Next slide. Here is an example where, rather than solar then solar industry, kind of a pivot to, a new renewable industry on the new frontier. You have a more old established mechanism in economic development of business retention, and you have an established industry, which is to say, in this case, a copper tube factory. And so, but this was a pivot also. This is actually also about paper and timber industry. It basically resulted in a job increase. Next slide. This is a case study in diversification in Columbia, Missouri, and this is kind of more to speaking to entrepreneurs or to small scale manufacturers. And these small scale manufacturers can manufacture anything from hardware, handbags, hot sauce, anything, but it's things that people buy on the street and can also be exported and sold online. And it also creates kind of a culture in the community. And so Columbia, Missouri diversified in 2018 to create this kind of a entrepreneurial creative space in an area they designated the Loop, and they used they rezoned in order to do this. And they partnered with the Regional Economic Development Authority to do this. Next slide. And this supported artists and manufacturers like Shared Kitchen and other new entrepreneurs. Next slide. So this is again about withstanding shock. This is something that happened post-COVID, this particular case study. Because we need to look at resilience and mitigation, but we have to also recognize that resilience is associated with recovery too, and it's associated, for example, with programmatic response that's creative and effective. In this case, in Hanover, Pennsylvania, the Northeastern Pennsylvania Industrial Resource Center provided resources including online manufacturer impact assessments and customized solutions and new technical services. Next slide. And it allowed manufacturers basically to return to operations faster and to identify alternative suppliers in the supply chain faster and to respond more comprehensively. Next slide. So just talking a little bit about an economic impact study. This is something that I'm sure many of you have done. Maybe you've done this in-house. If you've had the resources, maybe you've hired a consultant to do this. I think on the previous slide, it said something about helping the businesses, or it's like, it's not just a needs assessment, which is important in terms of getting out to, that's okay, you can keep going. I couldn't recall my train of thought. It's not just a needs assessment where you want to get out to your business community and say, what are your different kinds of needs? And IDC has a template on the restoreyoureconomy.org website about that. But this is a impact study for your community that assesses your physical damage and your economic damage to the industry and the local economy. Again, you need baseline data in order to do this. Can't emphasize that enough. And what it's going to show are multiplier effects that are going to give you a true picture of how the hit on individual businesses results, for the example, on the loss of a job for multiple employees at those businesses who then do not have money to spend and or spend it patronizing businesses outside the community. So the loss just multiplies. And this is why it's so important to keep your businesses operating with as few and short interruptions as possible and open. Next slide. So I will just conclude by indicating that communicating with your businesses, we talked about all the multiple ways that you need to do that. Communicating with the media, you're going to get resources that are going to flow into your community. If you can keep that story alive, it is an effective way of helping resources get to your community. Advocating for recovery efforts. I think it's obvious we need to advocate for preparedness and mitigation efforts as well. we really just can't stress enough in the age of pandemic. In this audience, you know this, but actually when I talk to groups outside of this audience that are not in a hurricane zone, that are not in tornado alley, they don't understand that you need to really have preparedness in place, because anybody can be affected. Also by a cyber shock. I mean, anything really. Creating resilience programs, we talked about that, and bolstering business and industry diversity. So that's what I have to share with you today, and happy to answer a few questions if you have them.
That was quite informative. Thank you, Vice President Clausen, for sharing that. Before we get to questions that we have from in the chat, just got a quick question for you. So as you were pouring over all that data and looking at best practices, what were some of the shocks or things that surprised you as you were looking at best practices or people who didn't do that well just across the country? What were some of the things that like just really, I guess, took you by surprise?
Well, it really took me by surprise. In the first round of PPP, the low success rate of Black and Hispanic businesses in getting PPPs, it was much, much lower. And, it was just like lack of maybe they didn't have somebody assisting them. And you can make a tiny, you can put a decimal point off, or you can just not have your forms in order. So that was, I think, a little bit of a surprise. Yeah, I'll just start with that.
Great, thank you. And we're going to open up, Mr. Agoli, are there any questions that we have in the chat for Vice President Clausen?
Not that I don't see anything under the questions box. Alicia, were there any other answer questions?
No, there haven't been any questions or nothing in the chat yet.
Great. Well, thank you. This is very, very, very informative. And again, as she stated earlier, in the handout section, there's a copy of this presentation to definitely empower you. So when things happen, you have a resource, you have a guide. And so we just want to thank you so much for being here with us today and just kind of starting the conversation with us, shaping the question and answers that we're about to go to now. Then we're going to start with our panelists. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. We have City Manager from Oakland Park, David Hebert, City Manager from Miami Beach, Alina Hudak, and City Manager from Key West, Patty McLaughlin. We're going to start off in alphabetical order, allow you to just tell a little bit about yourselves.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Hebert. I am the City Manager of Oakland Park, Florida. Oakland Park is surrounded mostly by Fort Lauderdale. We have neighboring cities of Lauderdale Lakes and also Wilton Manors. We're a lower than median income community. Mom and pop offices, warehouse areas, small businesses predominate here. One of the few larger entities that you may be familiar with is a brewery by the name of Funky Buddha, which has truly exploded over the past couple of years. I've been here for 7 years. Previously, I was an assistant city manager in both Homestead and Fort Lauderdale. And before that, I was a criminal prosecutor in the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. So business is new to me, but emergency management and dealing with the challenges that are unexpected are not new to me. So it's been an interesting time, and I thank you all very much for the opportunity to present today, and look forward to the discussion.
Great. Manager Hudak.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mario. It's a pleasure to be with everyone this morning. I'm Alina Hudak. I'm currently the city manager of the city of Miami Beach. I think just about everyone in the city of Miami Beach is a beautiful and amazing global destination, and I think everyone knows exactly where we are, which is part of our challenge, and the balance of the needs of our residents and what our residents expect from what is truly a small government. for a global destination and the conflicting needs of the influx of tourism and what that means to our economy and the importance of it to our economy, but obviously the impacts that it has on our quality of life and the issues that our residents care about. So it's a constant balance, and it's a constant debate amongst our elected policymakers. I have been with the city for about 1.5 years. I served first as an assistant city manager and was selected to this position in April of this year. So I've been the city manager for about 6 months. Prior to coming to the city of Miami Beach, I served for 35 years with Miami-Dade County government. For those of you who are not familiar with county government, it is the regional government that provides regional services for this community. It's a very large government with an $8 billion operating budget and 27,000 employees. I retired from that county government as a deputy mayor, but had served as the county manager and had served as an assistant county manager for many years. It's great to share the call and this panel and this opportunity with my peers and colleagues, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Now, Manager McLaughlin.
Good morning. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think most of us know Key West, Florida. If not, it's a 2x4 island. I can echo a lot about what Alina says as far as trying to, we're a tourist town, and we're trying to balance our residents and our quality of life, and many things. We're dealing with cruise ships. We have a referendum that passed that we want smaller cruise ships. So that's been a huge impact for us. So, but yeah, we have a lot. Our tourist season is booming. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Since the COVID, we were shut down for a couple of months, but came back strong. So some people like that, some people do not. Our businesses, right now I'm dealing with some businesses closing and things of that sort, and we'll get into that, but I look forward to all of the discussions that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you. And also let me do some housekeeping that I didn't do earlier. We are honored to have a few members of the council popped in. Mayor Tiotti, council member, and we have Senator Garcia and staff, council member and his staff, Arida Mendez-Casaya. So thank you guys for enjoying this really important conversation. And so before I get to like a lot of questions, let's start with the presentation that we saw. It was great. It was very robust. Is there anything that like kind of that you were surprised by? Because I know you've been implementing these plans, like you've been doing it in the trenches, and it's a helpful guide. So just anybody, we'll go to the beach with Manager Hudak. Is there anything that when you saw that presentation, best practices, that you were quite surprised by, or it was pretty much?
No, not at all. I really enjoyed the presentation because I love the order. I love, I love the academic aspect of being able to plan like that. And so I actually want to take the presentation and highlight and talk to my senior staff about that. What I find the communications piece in particular, I think was very interesting to me, because I think
Yes.
that's all that's something that all of us always have to strive to figure out how to do better. It's so important when you're the type of destination that we are, that the appropriate messaging go out about any situation that we're dealing with, whether it's an emergency type condition or whether it's just the day-to-day, issues that we deal with, in particular, in our case, with spring break. What I did find, in an ideal world, I think we all would love to plan and have that perfect strategy going into any situation. But I think all of us can probably attest to the fact that we can have the best made plans, and every situation calls for us to react in different ways. But I love the structure of the presentation, and I love, the ability to really be able to take a step back, look at it, analyze it, and discuss it with my senior staff. I think there's a lot of value to what Frankie presented.
Great. And I love that we have the Tri-County area represented in this conversation. We have Oakland Park, Broward County, we have the beach, Miami-Dade County, we have Key West, Monroe County. So now let's head down to Monroe County. You began to talk about how your community was impacted, and so now if you can just expand, like, so how talk about the major impact of COVID as it relates to sure.
Oh, thank you. We had mixed positive and negative. We were shut down, totally shut down. The road was blocked for a few months, so we had no tourists. And that was tough for 2 to 3 months. I mean, we were shut down. So, you know, we're a tourist town. We depend on parking revenue. We depend on sales tax. So it was tough for that. But as soon as the road came back up, as soon as they opened the road, we had a boom of tourism. So much so that our general fund, I think it was like 124% over, you know, in May of what we, and I'm looking at some of the figures. It was just astronomical. It still is. So, but again, we had businesses close, and then we believe we had about 2,000 people leave the island because of COVID, and that's now what that brought too is a labor shortage. So of course we are a tourist town. We have restaurants, we have bars, we have, you know, so people weren't making money, and they left. You know, that was tough. We went back home to live with mom or dad or another family member. So we had, you know, we really still struggling with that today, with a shortage of staff, and a lot of that too is housing. But it started. We had 40% of our homes were just making it. I mean, just at that fine line. And of course, COVID took it over, you know, and it's a very tough time for many, many people. And our food bank went from 8,000 a month, people needing food, to 14,000. So, and some of the issues that we dealt with was rental assistance and food and medical. And we put together a recovery task force. And I can get into that whenever you're ready. But and it was a mixture of businesses and residents, nonprofits. We called it Key West Recovers. So and we still work with that today. We as a city work with nonprofits to help with food and rental. And I think it's close to 500,000 we started with to help to assist our community.
Well, then I'm definitely going to come back to you on that rental assistance. I know Miami-Dade County, they just released a email that they got 100% out before the deadline. And so, and I know some counties were struggling. And so I would love to get back and hear more about your task force. We're going to go to our northernmost panelist, Mr. City Manager Hebert. I have a question really quick before we go there. It's funny that you talk about how you had all of those additional revenues, but Florida being one of the first states to kind of reopen fast. A lot of people moved down from other states. So I think we got about 35,000 New Yorkers moved down to Florida. And this year, their revenue projection, they're expecting roughly $7 billion in additional revenue for the state budget that they just they didn't expect. And so those numbers that you're seeing that we are seeing across the state. And so now let's go to the our northernmost panelist, Manager Hebert. What were the top 3 issues that you countered during the crisis, and what are you and some of the and what are you still encountering today during the pandemic?
So we're a much smaller city than many of the other jurisdictions that would be actively engaged in some of the larger economic development programs. But we have similar challenges. Most of our business community is small employers, and they were dramatically impacted by the uncertainty very early on. What we did was what local communities do all over this country, and that is mobilize to assist in the most immediate way possible. The doctor's presentation highlighted the fact that the municipalities in Florida are uniquely primed to address an immediate impact emergency. And so when you're dealing with the evolution of COVID, which happened so dramatically and so really the impact was enormous. Nobody understood what was happening. Nobody understood what the elements were that they should anticipate. So what we did was develop lines of communication immediately, some as simple as putting up banners. We dispatched our librarians, who are excellent researchers. We have our own city library that we support, to open up a phone bank to answer all questions, whether they're medical related, business and economic related, just the uncertainty. We partnered with 2 cities next door to us, Fort Lauderdale and Wilton Manors, to do food distribution. And we also set up our city employees to distribute food baskets directly to shut in individuals within our community. The unique thing about the situation, really, from a retrospective perspective, is that suddenly I had resources freed up because there was so little necessity for people to have their regular job responsibilities as a priority. So what we did have initially and throughout much of the pandemic was the resources of people power. We also have a very robust volunteer network here locally. And so we put together early on packages for business assistance that included masks and posters for safety and information for the public about where to go to get food or resources. We set up a network with not-for-profits, including the chamber, to provide counseling and also guidance for grant assistance and loans. Later in the epidemic, we were able to hire an independent contractor that would assist us in identifying other loan opportunities that could be provided to the small businesses. But we used everything from social media to telephone banking to the website and everything in between to reach out and offer our assistance. And ultimately, I think that our businesses, as impacted as they were, have really survived. And over time, I think they've even prospered. So it was a very difficult time, and there were a lot of challenges throughout the last 18 months. But I have to say that I think our city is stronger. We're more cohesive, and I think we're better prepared for whatever the next situation is that might come around.
That's great news. That's great. And that's quite innovative, that communication system that you put in place, because residents, like, they didn't know where to go every day, because as the state, federal government gained new information, things would change. And so that's great that you were able to implement a plan like, hey, you call here, you ask this, and you have a question, we can give you the latest. Because if you're relying on the news, like, it might not be the newest. And so that's very impressive, that the work that you were able to do. Let's go back to Miami Beach. When I'm not in Tallahassee here, I'm in Miami-Dade County. I'm right across the bridge from the beach, and I go there a lot to dine. And I noticed, like, early on, because when we began to reopen, there's like who can open, who can't open. And so you notice, like when you go to Lincoln Road, like, you have just shops. And so they were not allowed to be open, a lot of the restaurants initially. And so the question for you, Manager Hudak, what have you done to help retain small businesses in your community? Because I know they were hit really hard because they rely on a lot of tourism, and they have to definitely be open too. So.
Well, Mario, in listening to my neighboring cities, you know, we faced all the same things that everyone faced.
Mhm.
And we were running sort of this parallel government. We were still running our day-to-day services while we were running an emergency response. And we were doing all the same things that everyone has described. I mean, we had a resource center for all of our businesses, not just our small businesses. And we took our employees that weren't delivering direct services, and we had the volunteer bank and the resource center to provide information. We partnered with the Rockefeller Foundation and actually received a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Department of Health. And we did something that we call Race to Trace, which is a program by which our businesses had the ability to access not only, you know, testing, but vaccination resource. And so we did that in partnership with those two organizations and had tremendous success with that. We did have restaurant grants and we did have small business grants opportunities. We partnered with Uber Eats. We did a whole host of different things through our economic development programs, through our communications department, through our resiliency folks. We really, you know, it really became a command center in my office every single day. I mean, that's what it was, and that's what it's been for a year and a half in terms of our response. The interesting thing I think about what happened in Miami Beach, that while we were in the early days when we were technically shut down, we weren't shut down. People still kept coming to Miami Beach. And people were here, and people were walking the streets and looking for things to do and looking for places to go. And yet, you know, many of our businesses were shut down. And while we have certainly enjoyed an incredible economic recovery, and we're very optimistic about our future, and our revenues, like everyone is discussing, have been up, you know, that those first 6 months really money and our ability to really access some of the federal money, our property tax base also suffered. And so we were able to close our general fund gaps because of our federal money. And we're certainly hopeful that the impact of the people that are moving here and the impact of the increase that we're seeing will you know, really get us through the next year in a much more favorable way. But we've had some difficulty in terms of balancing our priorities and making sure that we address some of the issues that we've had to address budgetarily, because we did have impact in particular during those early months.
Hey, let me just follow up that, because now, like, I do remember everyone from across the country wanted to come to the beach. And so you have to do increase policing, and so if you want to just, because I love the way you answered it, but I completely forgot how, like, everybody was coming to the beach, and you just had it almost like you had too many people because most of the places and so if you want to just elaborate on that, how are you able to and this is not prepared, how are you able to and also the presentation talk about how the media, they portray things in somewhat it's completely different, and so you guys had to kind of answer those questions, how they tried to how the media made things look sometimes worse than they are actually on the beach. And so
we had one weekend that was challenging, and that video image has haunted us for the entire year. The video image has played on every national news story. It has played everywhere. And quite frankly, I became city manager in April. That weekend was in March. We were experiencing, again, a really significant increase in visitors. We continued to experience that. It was not necessarily a spring break crowd. It was it was just a crowd. It was a lot of people here, and that continued March, April, May, June, July. And even today, again, thank God that we have people coming to Miami Beach and that they love it here that much, and that we're as vibrant as we are. These are all good things. But back to the point of communications and managing the message, and that one weekend in March is something that we are still to this day having to address and having to deal with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no secret the things that have happened here historically and what the challenges are, but it's unfortunate, and it's something that we deal with every day and every weekend.
Well, hats off to you because that was a tough to step in, and so hats off to you the way you guys led through and told you the true story, because sometimes the media, like she said earlier, they can kind of distort things and you get a completely wrong impression of areas. So our next question, and this is for all of the panelists, what are some lessons that you've learned from the pandemic, and some things that you would have done differently if you can go back let's not look at like if we can go back, because like we're in today. So what are some of the top lessons you like, but like going forward, if something similar or another challenge, like I would address this slightly different, because there's nothing that you can't go back. We're forward facing, but some things like how would you possibly operate differently? We're going to start with I'm going to go to the north and work our way. Actually, no, we're going to start with we're going to go south and work our way up. So Manager McLaughlin, some things that you learned that you just do slightly different. Not that you made a mistake or anything, but when new information became available, that you'll change the way that you. So.
I'd like to go back to the communication point, which is the key. I think if I was assistant city manager, at the time of COVID, I've been city manager just 3 months. I was interim for 3, and now it's 3 months for City of Key West. But during that time, I was very much involved as assistant city manager. I think one of the things that I would do differently would be to have the communications manager, which we did hire, quicker. You know, we met, but I don't think we responded as fast as, and looking back, as we could have for our businesses and our residents. You know, we got the word out. We learned along the way. We got the word out a little slower than I would have. I think we could have done a better job with that. So, and we have such a diverse community where we have a lot of, no different than Miami Beach, I would assume, Haitians, so a lot of Spanish speaking. And so we had to get the word out in 3 different ways: English, Spanish, Creole, however we could get it, and make sure that we were meeting the needs. So I would say I would go back to the communicating. We had to communicate both to our residents and to our tourists because we were mandated with masks. We did a lot of advertisings and things, but I think it took us a little while to get up to speed.
All right, so we're working our way up. Next, we'll have Manager Hudak. So
I think in terms of lessons learned, it's clear to me, and it continues to be clear to me that, in hiring decisions and in everything that we all do, relationships are so important. And so if I learned one lesson, and I was actually the COVID lead in my role as the assistant city manager prior to becoming the city manager, and I had just started. I started with the city February 18th, and in March we were shutting down the city. So I think that, there was tremendous value to the fact that I had spent 35 years working for Miami-Dade County government, which in our world is the government that was leading the response and that was making the decisions relative to what all of us were going to be charged with implementing. So in many situations, and yet we were the city that had the beach, we were the city that had all the tourists, we were the city that had shut down spring break. So there were a lot of things that had to happen immediately. So I think in terms of lessons, it's so important to hire and to have a senior staff that has those relationships and that has that experience and that has the capability to, in an emergency response, whether it's something completely unprecedented like what we dealt with in the last year and a half, but even a storm, we all as leaders have to have the capability to be able to call each other up and say, I need to know what you're doing, or I need your resource, especially when you're a small government like we are. Again, I come from a world where I had tremendous resource and I had tremendous asset. So when I was at the County Emergency Operations Center, I could take over a country if I had to, because that's the level of asset that I had available to me there. But here it's very different. And I think that in our roles, our relationships, our ability to access resource is so important. And as I watched it all unfold, it was so glaring to me how important that was. In terms of what we would have done differently, I have to tell you, I'm tremendously proud of the city of Miami Beach and what we did. I mean, we worked so hard, 24/7, every day. We had meetings and briefings with our commission every single day for months, keeping them informed on what we were doing. We were following what the county was doing, and we were reconciling our rules and regulations, our information to our businesses, to our residents. We were updating our website and we were communicating on all our social media platforms. So I'm very proud of what we did. I think a pandemic is just unprecedented. In preparation for any other emergency, I would tell you that, we should buy things ahead of time, and we should, there's a whole host of checklists that you do in preparation for any type of emergency. But this one, I think that there's no way that any of us could have possibly expected it to happen the way that it happened and to last as long as it has. And you know, like David said, I think we're all better for it. Our cities have certainly, I mean, for those of us who were slow in terms of technology, the pandemic certainly forced us to take technology and our capabilities to another level. So it has really allowed us to really reevaluate our workforce and how we do our business, which is a great thing. In our case, we've made improvements to our permitting processing, you know, and a lot of what we do in our building department. And so I think that there's a lot that we've learned and a lot that's been good, if any of us can say that with a straight face, because God knows it's been so painful and difficult and heartbreaking. I've lost 2 employees to COVID. I can't even talk about it because it's so emotional. So it's been a really difficult year and a half, and I'm very proud of our community as a whole. And I think we've learned a lot.
Great, great. It's funny that you mentioned resource, how tough it is to access. And so I had a meeting with the new director of disaster emergency management, and one of his legislative budget requests that he's putting in funding so he can help provide more resources. So because he realized that you guys don't have the staff to draw down everything, and so I think you're going to find like we found a friend in the past director, but I think also in this director. Director Guthrie, he realized that you need those resources. And so that's part of his legislative budget request to kind of assist. And so then we're going to go north, same question, Manager Hebert. What is the lesson learned from the pandemic? And what would you have done differently, or if you can go back or you tweak going forward?
So those are great thoughts. Yeah, I think that as I reflect back, I realized that I missed step 1 of my favorite book about management, and that is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. And the first step is be proactive. You know, we all knew that a vaccine was being developed. We all knew that it was going to be coming down the pike. But I sat here as a city manager, not trying to impose myself to figure out what the process was going to be, to understand the distribution network. And I regret deeply sitting quietly like an island when I should have gotten more engaged. It wasn't until the vaccine was approved in December of 2020, and I was reading the newspaper articles about the chaotic rollout, the lines, the exhaustion, the fact that you needed to have computer access in order to register, and the websites were going down. And I failed to get engaged until that Christmas and New Year's holiday. But that Sunday, the first Sunday of January of this past year, I picked up the telephone and I called Dr. Paula Thackey, who's our medical director here in Broward. And I said, will you get me vaccines? Because if you will get me vaccines, I will get them in the arms of the most vulnerable people in my community. And by the end of that same week, when we had trained our staff to figure out how to handle the vaccine medication, and we had reached out to people who are serviced by Meals on Wheels, to our local churches, our not-for-profits, we opened 7 days a week and put shots in people's arms in January. And we did it all by appointment. We did it all very orderly. We did not have any chaos, and nobody stood in line for more than 15 minutes. And after we opened that pod and realized that we could do that effectively, I called my surrounding municipal managers and said, if you guys want to arrange to send me a bus of your most vulnerable seniors, I will get them in and I will get them shots. And we did it in a controlled and orderly way, primarily because we are the government closest to the people and we know how to do these things. You can talk about the wonders of the federal government, and I couldn't agree more with the comments about how valuable their assistance and resources were. or talk about the state and how important it was that they prioritized all of the activities in emergency management that they did. But at the end of the day, we are at ground zero, us, the cities. We are the representative of government closest to the people. And if we are not engaged in delivering for their most emergency needs, then shame on us. And this was particularly impactful to what the doctor was talking about in her presentation about the surprise that she had regarding the statistics about the disparate impact based on the diversity of a community. It's easy when you have money and transportation and technology to figure out how to get access to a vaccine. It's hard if you don't speak English. It's hard if you don't have mobility. It's hard if you can't figure out how to make an appointment. And because we opened in January, we were able to service thousands of people locally and within this region with getting those vaccines to the people who frankly most needed them. You think of the people who were 80 or 85 or 90 years old, fearful and uncertain, who have limited mobility. We sent our parks vans to pick them up at home. We brought them in, we gave them a shot, we scheduled them for their return shot, and we sent them home. That's government in action. And I regret not saying to whoever was making the decisions on that massive scale, which had to happen, there's no question, because those vaccines couldn't have been done in very small doses, but they should have been done in coordination with organizations like ours who know how to handle emergency management, who have been trained and have done it on a regular basis. And we should have been the people who were able to reach those most in need in our communities. And that's my lesson learned.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. And
Well
it leads, yeah, can't really say anything after that. That's perfect. It leads right into my next question, and we've all hit on it. It was her great surprise how like there was a lack of diversity in applying for the funds. You mentioned it. Manager McLaughlin mentioned how she had to definitely everything in 3 languages. So next question, and I kind of want to combine these two because they're very similar. So, and we're gonna start from north this time. So what strategies are you, and I apologize for my voice. Whenever I come to Tallahassee, I have to take a Allegra every day. And so you can hear the sinus issue. So the question, which is very important. So what strategies are you using for economic diversification in your communities? And also, what are some best practices and challenges in integrating equity, EDA current topic investment priority into disaster recovery? And so those two questions are very important. So and you just hit on. So let me restate it. So what are some strategies you're using to for economic diversification in your communities, and also integrating equity into disaster recovery?
Mario, you sound great. Don't worry about it. Yeah, we are blessed, like the other cities, to have received the federal funding that we have from ARPA. We are currently engaged in a process of assessing how best to use those resources. But the reality is, you know, as a kid from a small town in Minnesota, where everybody pretty well looked like me, I used to romance about railroads until I moved to Florida. And then I realized that to too many people in this community, the railroad tracks don't connote romance. They connote separation. And like many of the communities in South Florida, the railroad bifurcates my city. And it bifurcates in very many ways, psychologically, economically, and the reality is that I have a qualified census tract area in our city where I had already previously plans to move our library from the east side of town to the west side of town, where a knowledge repository is most needed by the community, most desperate to get a leg up in our world. And we're going to look at designating ARPA funds to assist that effort and also to assist the community there. We need to build bridges to people that have felt disconnected. And we saw that in the vaccine distribution. The same propensity that the doctor referred to about the businesses who had applied for grants and who had received grants, and how poignant it was that those who were owned by minorities did not receive the same amount. We have to redouble our efforts to break down that barrier of the railroad track and make our cities more responsive to a community that has long distrusted government, and for good reason, and for very good reason. I had a community meeting in a park just a week ago where the woman that was there said, "I've lived here for 60 years and the city never listens to anything we say." And that's tragic. It's truly tragic that the scars that were left from segregation continue to haunt our city. And this was in a meeting where we were talking about making improvements in the park. So I'm going to be allocating resources more regularly to try to support that community at every level, not just the economic level for the businesses, but the empowerment level of the library and the park system, the roadways. I mean, the people who were at this meeting remember when our roadways in that community were made of dirt. But think about that in their lifetime in South Florida. So that's my plan, and I'm looking forward to utilizing some of those much needed federal dollars to really empower that part of our community especially.
Thank you. Same question for you, Manager Hudak. What are some strategies you're using for economic diversification, and how are you integrating equity into disaster recovery?
I'm sorry, Mario, I don't know if you're directing anything at me, but the screen is freezing, so I'm having a hard time hearing.
Okay, let's try that again. It's for you, Manager Hudak. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can now.
Perfect. Same question. So what strategies are you using for economic diversification? And also, how are you integrating equity into disaster recovery?
That's a tough one, and something again that we are addressing, but you know, really just starting to address. I mean, it's no secret we're obviously a tourist dependent economy, heavy on tourism and the hospitality industry. We have had a significant amount of conversation in the last year with our commission policy committees about how we do that and how we diversify our economy. There's a very real commitment to bringing a different and higher end mix of office space use here. So we are in the process of doing an RFP for Class A office space, doing some very targeted analysis of the technology and financial industries and financial service industry and what works for Miami Beach. Obviously, we're seeing this influx of people who are coming to live and work from here, and I think there's still a lot of unknown as to whether that will translate into those individuals wanting office space here. So that's all and under analysis and really trying to be very aggressive about going after those markets. I think, you know, from my perspective, in order to have equity and in order to have even a semblance of being able to properly address the needs of our minority community or our businesses, you know, we have to have diversity in our workforce. So from my perspective, in my leadership role in the last 6 months, I want to make sure that I have a leadership team that represents the community. We have an outstanding economic development director who came to us from Dania Beach and has been with the city less than a year, and she brings a lot of expertise and knowledge. And so she's building her team and addressing a lot of these types of issues. And, you know, we do have all the traditional things that everybody does. We have the small grants, the small business grant program. And so now I think the key is, how do we maintain that when the funding sources that have made those come to fruition dry up? And those funding sources will dry up. And so how do we as a city maintain the commitment to that and continue to fund and continue to be able to keep our small businesses vibrant? So that's a challenge for all of us to do. And you know, like David, I have to make sure that I'm allocating resources to be able to do that.
Thank you. Same question for you, Manager McLaughlin. What are you using to for strategies for the diverse? Sorry, let me make sure. What strategies are you using for economic diversification, and also how are you integrating equity in disaster management recovery?
Well, I can agree again with Alina. We are just starting utilizing the federal funds and what we want to do with that. We're unique, and we're all tourist based, and that's scary if you think about it, because when you shut down, we did not, you know, it caused us some issues. So we are addressing, you know, how we want to move with that. I think in our case, we do not have an economic, you know, team. That's something that I hope we can certainly look at in the future. And we also, most of our residents, we have, as far as homesteaded in our homes, 17% of our homes are homesteaded, which says most of our homes are second and third homes. We're so that's difficult for us. So at this point, we're looking and just starting out of how we can you know, work on this. So that's where we're at this point. You know, we do too have an influx of people who've come to Key West. Our homes, an average home, it's not 300,000, it's like 800,000, and right now 1.2 million is just an average home. So we've had an influx, probably like Miami Beach as well, of people coming in private planes and paying cash for homes. So, you know, and which affects our workforce and our labor force and you know, the labor force and the people here. So we have a lot to work on and limited things at this point. So I'm just in the beginning stages of trying to make headway with our CFO.
Great. Thank you. Our final prepared question that we have for each of you is, what are some neighborhood revitalization strategies you're currently implementing and are planning to implement post-COVID? And so we'll start with the center. We'll go to Manager Hudak again. What are some neighborhood revitalization strategies you're currently implementing and are planning to implement post-COVID?
We are in the process, well, actually, we're at the tail end of the creation of a redevelopment district on the north end of the beach. If you're familiar with Miami Beach, you know that the north end of the beach, you know, is different, very different than the south end of the beach. So we've just been through really a 2-year process of creating the North Beach CRA. It was a partnership, again, with Miami-Dade County, and we were able to get that done in June and July. That's going to yield us a tremendous incremental benefit. It's going to allow us to really do infrastructure, affordable housing, and all kinds of different collaborations that will change that community within the next 10 years. So we're really excited about that and the potential for that CRA and what it's going to do. You know, we're working with, we've got a planner visioning and talking about land use regulatory process for Ocean Drive and our historically preserved corridor and abilities there and our ability to really, you know, do whatever we can do to preserve the history, but make the property more valuable and property that can be used in different ways. We have a vacant storefront cover program that allows us to really do some creative things with the properties that are currently suffering and that are not being used, just so that, again, we're able to improve the appearance of those vacant street level storefronts. So there's a lot of different things that we're doing. You know, it's amazing what tax increment districts have done for Miami Beach. When you look at the history of Miami Beach and our convention center complex and the entire area that surrounds our convention center, it's amazing. And all of that was done in partnership with the county and in being able to create these redevelopment districts that allowed for the increment to be dedicated to the infrastructure needed. Our convention center, rehabbed our convention center into the beautiful $600 million facility that it is today without that type of creativity. So those are the tools that we're using and doing everything we can to maximize that and to leverage it. We do have, unfortunately, huge gaps in our capital program, and we have a prioritization of stormwater and neighborhood projects that, you know, we did a very elaborate planning process that led to that prioritization, but we don't have the money to implement that program.
Yeah.
So it's a very challenging thing without that infrastructure and without the capabilities to be able to really, you know, have the infrastructure that you need in place to deal with, you know, climate change and you know, all the resiliency issues that we all face in Florida. Funding to be able to do those projects is also critical on the list.
Great. And hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of a lot of those, the Florida Resilient Grant Program. Met with them this week. They have.
All right, we're busy. Everybody in this office right now is working on turning those grant applications around as we speak.
By money and great. And a good thing I just mentioned, like they got, they're using a lot of ARPA dollars. So I think it's roughly, so it's 500 ARPA, and then the program maybe 100 a year, and so it's going to be a good year. And they're looking 2 years out, and so I think that's going to be beneficial to all of you guys. And so I'm excited that they had that forward thinking to really take care of like sea level rise, flooding, things of that nature. And so hopefully that'll be a resource to you. Same question, Manager McLaughlin. What are some neighborhood revitalization strategies you're currently implementing or planning to implement post-COVID?
Well, we are working on a revitalization program for our Duval Street. So that's our main street downtown, and where all our tourists and people, you know, come, and most of our restaurants, all of our bars, and, you know, are there. So we're just finished in-house reviewing it, and it'll go out next week, a meeting with our planning director to make the final touches on that. And we're also revitalizing our Mallory Squares. It's our sunset celebration. Not sure if everybody's familiar with the sunset celebration place in Key West, but that's where thousands and thousands of people come and to see the sunset. And I must say it's the most beautiful sunset in the world. But we are revitalizing that area. My vision for that area is to make it come alive. If you've been there, it's just basic, you know, just cement, basically. And what I'm trying to do is make sure we have lights and we have action and things of that sort, and we use it more than the you know, the sunset hours. So that's the TDC, we got a grant from TDC to replace the bathrooms. So we're pretty excited about that revitalization. We're also, you know, we're doing cafes for outside. So we're allowed, since this COVID issue, pandemic, for all of us, we put people outside, and we allowed the restaurants and the bars to place the cafes on the sidewalks and things of that sort. And that's huge for businesses. You know, when you first started with the COVID, you had to separate and things of that sort. So we're revising that as well.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that. When I was there, I missed the sunset. It was cloudy, and so I'm looking forward to going back and actually catching it.
Come on back.
Definitely. Same question for you, Manager Hebert. What are some neighborhood revitalization strategies you're currently implementing and are planning to implement post-COVID?
So it's a wide array, and a lot of what has been touched on already by my fellow city managers is happening here on a smaller scale because we don't have the tourist dependency that their economies have. But it starts as they've indicated with infrastructure. We are challenged in South Florida because of the climate changes, and I am grateful that ARPA monies can be utilized for water and water investment, because if we're not taking care of keeping our community above water, then all the economic development strategies will be for naught. One creative solution that we found that empowers that same qualified census tract area is that the city owned 2 acres of polluted land for 15 years. Because this city had not received any development activity for decades, nobody was interested in those vacant lots. We are currently negotiating and finalizing a development agreement to build residential and commercial mixed-use space. And one of the ways we were able to attract a developer was by committing to lease 1 floor in one of the new buildings. There will be 2 as the new City Hall operations location. And because they had a financial tenant that was of good credit worthiness, they were able to find financing for their building. So we're seeing a development. We've cleaned up the pollution. The construction will start early next year. But better than that, because we'll be moving the existing City Hall to this west area of our city across the tracks to that qualified census tract area, now we've freed up land at the railroad tracks on the east side, which now can be utilized for the commuter rail line when that ends up being in place. And we are currently being recommended as one of the primary sites for a train stop. So all of that comes together, I think. You know, cities are a tapestry, and it begins at the very bottom of the street, really, with the infrastructure, and then the streetscapes and the tree canopies and the park opportunities, and then the actual vertical buildings. And we're engaged in all of that right now, but not in just the east area of our city, really across the way. And it's really exciting that we're seeing every community empowered with new opportunities and new amenities.
Mm-hmm.
We're nearing the end of our presentation. We have 2 questions from viewers who've been watching, and so we're going to have Ms. Agoli to go ahead and ask the 2 questions. And I'm not sure, I haven't seen the question, and so it will allow whoever would like to address them. So Mr. Agoli, if you can present the 2 questions, and we definitely want to thank everyone who got a chance to participate and watch with us today. So Mr. Agoli.
Absolutely. So there's a question from Mayor Ziadi, actually.
Welcome, Council Member.
Would you please share the concept that you have taken to grow your city hall in the middle of a pandemic? It really is thinking outside the box, which I believe helped your city move forward in spite of a pandemic. I'm assuming that's for City of Oakland Park. Have you done the city hall?
Sure. Our city hall used to be a fire station, and even at one point the local jail. And it had unfortunately languished for many years without the kind of TLC maintenance that would have been needed to really be a viable building. You know that the building code has changed dramatically because of the increasing in storm intensity. And so we had to look at the situation and ask ourselves, you know, it's an attractive building, it's a nice looking building, but it's falling apart, and making an investment in that building just really didn't make a lot of economic sense. To make matters worse, it's too confined to centralize all of city operations. So I like to play a game with blocks. I think I've been doing that since I was about, I don't know, 2 or so. And I like moving little pieces around to make them fit together in a pattern that looks nice to me. So when I looked at the challenges of the existing city hall and looked at the desire the commission had for a train stop and looked at where the possibilities were for that train station to occur, it was clear to me that the City Hall property was the most likely place for a train stop. And it was not being utilized to help revitalize our downtown because it was city-owned property that was not paying any ad valorem resources to the city coffers or to the county. Unfortunately, our CRA is non-TIF, so we don't even have any resources that we can invest. We have to be creative about our use of the resources that we do have. So when I looked at the polluted properties that are across the way in the west side of town, and looked at the situation of the train station and City Hall, and the fact that operations were bifurcated in a different building, and also that the building was falling apart, I put the blocks in place with my team and said, this is how we're going to strategize to get this done. And we did a massing study before we went to market on those 2 vacant lots to determine what it was that would be saleable, financially viable for a developer, and also what kind of city needs could be solved by that particular potential development. And we made a list. We wanted more public parking. We wanted that mixed use. We wanted to see that land, which was on the city rolls, so it was not paying ad valorem taxes either. And we went to our partner at the county and said, hey, will you help us out? And so we were able to give advantages, not just in leasing the City Hall space in the new building, which is a different challenge entirely, which I'd love to hear more about in some of your future meetings, because how do you plan for office space post-pandemic? And that's my next goal,
Right.
is to figure out what it means to allow people the flexibility to work remotely. Sorry, I'm off of the answer, Mayor. Forgive me. The bottom line is we committed to a 15 or 20-year lease in the new building. We're freeing up City Hall. We've gone out to an RFQ to find a developer who will help us build a train stop and develop a mixed-use development at the current City Hall property, while still providing for the green space and park amenities that are also there. And by the time that 15 to 20-year lease is over, we will have realized the ad valorem revenues from the development, not just at the polluted sites that were useless to the city, but also from the new development at the current City Hall property. And I am confident that the finances of it will provide latitude for the future of this city to determine whether or not it is better for us to continue to lease our City Hall operations, or whether the city would like to explore the possibility of yet again owning and building a new City Hall that could actually service the community effectively. I hope that provides you some insight.
Definitely, it did. Thank you.
Perfect.
And our final question, if you can go ahead, Mr. Goley.
Yes, I know we're running out of time, so if you can just as quick as possible. This is from Mr. Glendon Hall. How did each city deal with the conflict of the messaging from the state, saying everything was open when actually restaurants, nightclubs, beaches were closed in your city due to COVID precautions?
We're going to do a quick lightning round with this question that everybody can do quickly. And how are you, Mr. Hall? I'm happy that you were able to join us. Repeat, if you can repeat the question one more time quickly, Mr. Goley, just make sure everybody.
How did you deal with the conflict of the messaging from the state, where the state was saying everything was open when actually restaurants and everything else in the cities were closed due to COVID precaution?
Manager Hudak.
Well, Mr. Hall knows all too well how Miami Beach dealt with it. He's one of our finest residents and volunteer. The processes. It was tough. It was tough to manage all of it, and to have the influx of individuals that we had coming to our city with really nowhere to go and nothing to do. And so that created all kinds of difficulties for us that were difficult to manage. And, you know, it was just difficult.
Yeah,
Manager
agree.
McLaughlin.
I totally agree. It was a minute by minute, I wouldn't say day by day, a minute by minute, how to get the word out. And, you know, having our communication manager, do that, as well as our commissioners, our mayor. I have to give kudos to our mayor who for 24/7 and our city manager and commissioners, we all worked to get that word out, but it was difficult. And it was very frustrating for us as well as our residents and tourists.
Manager Hebert?
I couldn't agree more. Fortunately, I wasn't burdened with the same challenges that my colleagues were because we're not really a tourist location. But having a clear and concise and absolute message was very, very difficult when there was limited communication from the other agencies of government. And when that message kept evolving, even at a medical level, when it began with you don't need masks, and then it became masks are absolutely necessary. So it was, you had to learn to be nimble, you had to be learning to pivot, and you had to be accessible. And that's why that critical element of opening our library for a phone bank became a lifeline to a lot of our residents.
Thank you all. Thank you all, our speakers from today, for joining this important conversation. Thanks to our council, our executive director who's here, the U.S. EDA for their support. I think it was very informative. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the council's website, and so please share it out to the people who were not able to take a part. So, because I think this can definitely help improve leadership in crisis going forward. So thank you again for joining us today. And have an amazing have an amazing Thursday.
Thank
you,
you
everyone.
for everything you do. Thank you.